You're listening to Within Tolerance, a podcast for machinists by a machinist. I'm your host, Dylan Jackson from Proteum Machining, and this week I am joined by Pete Oxenham of FTR CNC and Chatter. Welcome, Pete.
How's it going?
Doing
Good to
well.
be here.
Yeah, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to be here.
So before we jump into your backstory and everything, what are your companies? What do you do now? And then where can people find you?
Yeah, so I have a job shop in Rockland, California called FTR CNC. And then I just started a software company that's launching soon called Chatter.dev, and we make software to monitor machines.
Very cool. And on Instagram is best to find you?
Yeah, usually so FTR.CNC and Chatter.dev.
Cool. Well, let's get into your backstory. How did you get into manufacturing in general?
Yeah, so I was always kind of a techie kid, not mechanical in the slightest bit. And in high school, I had this 96 Mustang that basically the clutch went out, and that kind of sent me into the world of mechanical things, and I got really hooked on it. And I ended up wanting to make that thing a race car. So there was a program at the high school run by a guy named Dan Frank, and it was in its infancy at the time. They had I think 6 just crappy Chinese CNC machines that didn't really work that well. And since they didn't work well, there wasn't really a curriculum for them because it's hard to teach kids on machines that aren't behaving. So, but they were there, and I went to him and said, hey, I want to make a tow hook for my car because I got to let everybody know it's a race car. So, and they're not going to know if there's no tow hook on it. So he's like, sure, we got these machines. Here's Mastercam, have at it. That's kind of his teaching style, was you can follow the kind of CAD curriculum, or if you have a better thing to do with your time, we'll just pass you in the class just as long as you're being productive. So sat me down in front of Mastercam. I failed miserably because I had no idea about machining. I had no background in it, and I was naive at the time and probably had the idea that a lot of people have who aren't familiar with machining, where they think it's just it's a computer controlled machine. So we drop a 3D file in there and we're all set.
Right. Hit go and walk away.
But yeah, so that was a bit of a slap in the face. And if you've ever tried to machine a tow hook, you know that the work holding for something like that is kind of tricky if you're trying to make it look good. So I failed at that, but I ended up fabbing up something with the welder that was just kind of a tow hook bracket, and used this tow hook that I bought on eBay. And from there, I posted it on a forum and got a little bit of interest and sold 1 or 2 in 2013, which was my senior year of high school. And then graduated high school and spent that summer just trying to hustle car parts. I sold those tow hooks, and then I came out with a splitter rod, which was kind of my first actual successful product. And those things really caught on. So I was making them in my dad's garage, actually. So my grandfather, who's passed away, was into model trains. So he had 2 small manual mills, and then a small Atlas lathe, one of the ones they're Craftsman now, or I don't know if they still make them, but at the time they're pretty cool little shop lathe, tiny little thing. So I had a fixture, and I was just knocking these parts out, do op 1 on the lathe, cut it off, go to the drill press, drill the cross hole, take the thing in the fixture, move it over to the mill, do a 7/16 slot, as dirty and horrible as you can, just moving the x-axis back and forth. And it worked. I was selling these things, and eventually it got to the point where I had to have a job shop do it. So I was making the center parts of these, which is really easy. It's just, you just drill and tap them. I was making those, in my dad's garage. I was doing inventory and everything in my garage. When I needed CNC, I was hijacking the machines at the high school, which I didn't even go to anymore. I just come in as a quote unquote volunteer and hijack these machines. And then a job shop was making the clevis part, which is a little bit more involved, for our manual machines. So that was kind of phase 1. Did that for a while. And then eventually I was spending enough money on, subbing out job shop work on these clevises that I was like, well, this basically justifies a machine payment. And I believe I was 20 at the time, and again, very naive. And I didn't realize that it's not one for one. If you're, paying, $1,600 a month to a job shop, you can't just sub out that cost and now it's $1,600 to a machine payment, because as soon as you get a machine, you become a machine shop. So anyways, that I somehow convinced them to give me a shop and drop a machine on my shop floor. And then that was December 23rd, 2015. They showed up in this big truck and rolled this machine into my shop, dropped it down, hooked the power up and did a couple checks or whatever the apps guys do. And then just walked away and said, here you go, kid. And I had never run a Haas control before. And they just kind of showed me how to like select it on memory or how to put something in MDI, and that all the codes were on the back. And then they just kind of left. Like, they offered me training, but I was like, no, I'll figure it out. It's just another computerized thing. Like, so, but it was a really like surreal feeling at the age of 20 to like have something more expensive than I've ever touched in my life just drop down on my shop floor, and then everybody just left. And I was there at like 7 p.m. alone, like, okay, I'm looking at this thing, like, I got to figure out what to do with it. So,
and that's your SL20?
ST10Y.
Or S. Okay, yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's a ST10Y. So it's got live tools and the bar feeder and everything, but it doesn't have a
I didn't realize that was your first machine.
Yeah, that was my first machine. So, yeah, from there, I had the machine. I think I got about a week in or 2 weeks in, and then I swung the turret straight into the spindle. So that was fun.
Oh boy.
And the reason was I was using Fusion at the time to program it. And I was using this post. The only live tool Haas post I could find said like pre-development, do not use on it. And I thought this would be the perfect post for me. So I went in there guns blazing, and lo and behold, I don't know who like where this post came from, but the retract was G53U0W0, which is not a very effective code if you want to perform a retract.
No, it doesn't retract.
That's just an incremental move of nothing. So I got my, my first, like my lathe pass done, and everything was good. It pulls off the part, and the spindle's still turning. I'm expecting it to retract, and it just swings my live tool straight into the 3-jaw chuck.
Ooh.
So
how'd that go?
It wasn't too bad. It was more just a blow to my pride than anything, because these apps guys were probably kind of laughing at me when I first got the machine, or service guys or whatever. And they're back out here like a week or two later, But luckily it was just that little coupling. Like nothing actually broke. They just had to take the turret off, like, twist that thing into position, and then, just do some alignment checks. So, it was like $1,000 to get it fixed or something. Whatever it was better than how bad it could have been.
Sure. A nice or relatively cheap first crash for sure.
Yeah. So that kind of struck the fear of God into me. And I think over the next 5 years, I only ever ran one piece of posted code in that machine. The rest was all hand programmed.
A lot of lathe people do that anyway. So that's not too.
It turned out to be nice, because like most of the parts I do are, a minute and a half, 2-minute cycle, maybe using like 7 different tools. So if you're hand coding, you can get really aggressive with the retracts and everything, like making sure that you're not wasting any time. And if you've ever seen a rapid or a tool change on a Haas lathe, it's not very impressive. So if you can only retract 2 inches off the part and do your tool change there and be where you need to be on the next one, you save a heck of a lot of time. So yeah, that's kind of how I ran the lathe for, let's see, it was about 5 years ago, right? I got it end of 2015. And
we're coming up on 6 years. So then how did you get the end shoe? And let's talk about that decision, because I have a feeling that many of my listeners might not even know what that is.
Yeah. So the end shoe is a 500 millimeter horizontal mill. It's kind of a lesser known machine. It's actually from a manufacturer who's an automotive OEM in Japan. So they kind of built these machines to be, for their own factory. So they wanted, basically high reliability, low maintenance, and a lot of longevity. Because if you're an OEM and you're making your own machine, you don't want to have to make a machine again. So the longer you can get the thing to last, the more it's going to save you. So anyway, so the story behind that, I need to put a little backstory first. So I was making my own parts for my own racing brand. And then I had all this extra machine capacity. So I kind of became a job shop for some like local fab shops. And it wasn't even like they had prints. Like they would just bring me a part and say, hey, like, can we get 50 of these made? And again, I was young and naive at the time and probably still am. But I didn't realize that I was like aiding and abetting, like knocking off people's products. I just figured that they had these parts and they had made one or two and they just needed me to make them. So yeah, I'll draw it up. I'll make you a badge. Like no problem. So in retrospect, I feel pretty bad about that, but I didn't even know at the time. I was just like, well, the guy's got the part already. He obviously like got it made somehow. So I did that for kind of like less legit outfits, I guess, around here, but local fab shops that wanted to start up like a product line. I'd help them with the design work, and I learned a lot about like DFM and whatnot in that time. So we made a bunch of parts and then started doing a couple jobs here and there for like automotive brands where they already had prints and like a little bit more legit companies. And then this is where we get to the Enshu. In 2018, I had an opportunity where a buddy of mine, a good friend who was a customer of mine on the racing side and a friend of mine, posted on his Facebook that like, oh, hey, like I'm looking for a job shop that can do some like high production work. I texted him. I'm like, dude, why'd you not go to me? Like, you know me, come on. He's like, you can't handle this work. So I was like, try me. He was correct. I could not handle it, but I learned. It was this crazy job. Long story short, I kind of got this opportunity and I just grabbed it by the horns and was like, whatever it takes, like I'm going to do it. I was single at the time. I had nothing else, going on in my life besides work. So I'm like, let's do this. And a bunch of flights, bunch of meetings. And then they wanted first articles from me because they basically couldn't get enough of this product. So they wanted first articles, but I didn't have a mill. I was planning to get a mill, but I didn't have one at the time. So I texted my old high school teacher. I said, hey, I got this opportunity, kind of told him what it was. I said, I need to hijack your VF2 for like a couple days and I need to do it now. And he's like, come on over. Yeah, heck yeah. So we did our first articles, like 30 units of this thing. It's like a little assembly. And I flew them down to LA and they, went in the office, met with the engineering team, met with supply chain people, all that stuff. And then they shot me the biggest PO I've ever seen in my life at the time. And I was like, okay, I guess I got to get a machine. So I called my sales guy and said, hey, look, I need a machine. He's like, okay, like, what do you need? I'm like, well, I don't know, but I have to make a ton of these things. And I need the machine in like a week, ideally. So the only thing around was this Enshu that was sitting in Seattle, which I'd never heard of. I've never talked to anybody who's heard of the thing. And I'm like, what is this, some off-brand, like piece of garbage? And I did a little bit of research, and the only thing I could find online about Enshu was some guy on Practical Machinist complaining about having to like pay for service documentation or something on some really old Enshu machine. I couldn't find anything else about these machines. But my machine tool dealer did a time study on how many of these things I could make, and it met the customer's demand at machine utilization of, I believe we were at 23 and a half hours a day was our ideal utilization.
Wow.
Across both machines too. That was the fun part, because the lathe would run one op for one of the parts, and then that would flow over. I think our tack time would have been 2 minutes. So the lathe was at a tack time of 2 minutes, and the mill was at a tack time of 2 minutes to do a pair of these parts. Anyways, so they go together. So my dealer said they'd guarantee this time study. So I thought, well, I got nothing to lose. Like, I never heard of this machine, but I'll get it. And the thing showed up, and it is just a monster. I've never seen like I'd never seen in person such a large machine in my life. And
not to mention one that moves so fast for being so large.
It's very fast. And because of the utilization rate we had to be at, we had to run it at 100% rapid from basically day 2.
Yeah.
And we had to be up and running.
A horizontal is not typically somebody's first mill. Like I'm very surprised you didn't end up with a VF2 or, something along those lines.
Yeah. Well, I had always been like sort of like automation and process focused, like long term. I knew that's where I needed to be. And I really liked the idea of a horizontal mill, like not having to wait for somebody to load it.
Right.
So it seemed like the natural progression. The time scale was just kind of accelerated by the demand we had at the time. So we got that thing in, and they dropped it down. They had apps engineers there and whatever, but the parts we were trying to make, like, they were helpful, but the way the dealer had described it to me is that it was going to be like, it wasn't like turnkey, but the apps engineer would be with me the whole time we were rolling out this production. So I figured I'd be fine, right? And it turns out the apps engineer didn't want to work 24 hours a day for 8 days straight.
I'm shocked.
Yeah. And so we kind of ended up, on our own. It was me and kind of my right-hand man at the time, Evan. And we had this FANUC control with no probes in it because the probes had to be made custom. And
oh, really?
The place who would make the probes called me okay, can we fly somebody out there, next week or in 2 weeks? I'm like, well, I really need it sooner. Like, well, we can get somebody out there next week. And I'm like, well, we're going to be running production next week. How long do you need? Like, I've got a half hour a day. And they're like, well, this is just for measurements. And I'm like, okay, call me in February. This is November at the time. I was like, call me in the February because I can't be down. Like, I have to run this thing. So we had to manually touch off all the tools, all that stuff. And then this fixture we had was like, I think I may have sent you a photo of it at one point. It's a square, 4-sided tombstone, but the fixture for this one part was like a window machining fixture, and it had to come off the corner of the tombstone. It was this really bizarre deal. It had like these straps to hold it down. It's really hard to explain, so I'm not going to try to do it on the podcast. But point being, not your first fixture you want to do on a horizontal. And I had designed the whole thing so that the way we were having to dive to just machine the fixture was behind the tombstone. It was on the other side of the machine. Because I didn't realize, this is my first time ever programming a horizontal.
Right.
So I load up the program to kind of just start roughing out the fixture plate, and the tool wants to go behind, and I'm like, can we reverse this thing? And we looked at it and we're like, no, it's like, we don't have the time. It's going to take like basically half a day to re-engineer this fixture. So my buddy Stuart was over one night, I remember very clearly, and we were just manually reading out lines from the NC program for the fixture. And I was inside the mill, like peering over the tombstone, and he's jogging it. I'm like, a little bit more. And he's like counting down like the numbers till we're at like what we know our max is. And we're like, well, it doesn't seem like it's going to crash. So it worked. It was wild. Like, long story short, like there were a lot of challenges along the way. Like, we didn't have a manual mill, so there was really no way to machine the fixture plate blanks, like with the holes and everything. So I'm there like all night just with silver and Deming bits in my drill press, like doing manual layouts on these big, I think it was a 3-inch thick fixture plate by 14 inches wide, because that's the stock we needed. Most of it got roughed out, but it had that feature off the corner that has to come out. So anyways, it was crazy. But we made it happen. It's all kind of a blur in my mind, but we ended up getting into production. I think it was 5 employees at the time. I like hired on a couple temp workers because like I needed a guy to do assembly. 40 hours a week. He had 1 O-ring and 3 screws to put on. That was his entire job. 40 hours a week for 3 months or 2 months, whatever it was. And then, so we got it running. Everything was going like good, 24/7. And the one problem we had is my piston air compressor could not really keep up with this big horizontal mill. So, and we had no time at the time. I couldn't be shopping around and getting quotes for a stupid like twin screw compressor or whatever. So I just told one of my guys, I was like, go to Herc, get a diesel powered air compressor and park it outside the shop.
Oh,
So
jeez.
that's what we did because we also didn't have enough power, which is a whole nother story. But we didn't know if kicking a air compressor online was going to put us over our power limit, and we couldn't
Right.
afford to be down for a day. Like we would lose the contract. So we were just kind of stuck there where we had to just deliver daily box trucks coming to the shop and just kicking out product. And I was running the night shift all by myself. I had a guy who would come in at 5, kind of hand it off to him, and then I would go in the back room and sleep for a couple hours and then come back out and do it all again. So that is the story of why I have that end shoot. Basically, we got into a situation where we couldn't do it without that machine, and the opportunity was big enough that it was like, you know what, like let's pull the trigger. Like this is going to be worth it. So that
Holy
was kind of the leap of
crap.
faith.
You literally dove into the deep end. Like
Yeah.
not only first mill, but like first mill, and you've got to run it 23 and a half hours a day.
Yeah, it was wild, but like honestly looking back on it, it was like I mean, it was horrible for my health, but it was probably the best time I've ever had in my life. Like, I felt so driven, like nothing else mattered. Like, I didn't have any other responsibilities in my life at the time. I was just I was just shirking everything. Like, my car blew its head gasket. So I was like, screw it, I'll just live at the shop now. Like I'm here all the time anyways. Like, cause and so nothing else mattered except for machining for those like 2 or 3 months. And it was amazing. I loved it. I've never had a better time in my life. Like I look back very fondly on that.
Yeah, I imagine having that kind of driving purpose to be quite
Yeah.
fulfilling.
Yeah.
Not sustainable at all, but
I wouldn't
fulfilling.
do it again. I would never do it again. But if you get the opportunity and you're single, you got nothing else in your life, just do something ridiculous. Like, it's a risk, but it just, it's having that purpose. Like you said, it feels really good and it's a lot of fun.
So then talk to me about where Chatter came from, because we actually postponed this until you were ready to drop the public beta, which is coming
Yeah.
up here next month. So,
Yeah.
so where did this come from? Where did this idea come from? How long have you been working on it? What does it do? All the good stuff.
Yeah. So Chatter basically, I mean, for the first 10 months of it being a thing, it didn't have a name. It was just called IoT project on like all our GitHub and everything. But essentially, there was one really annoying thing I would have to do throughout my day all the time, because we do typically runs of like about like 500 parts, like 200 to 500 is kind of our norm. So the jobs aren't super long, but they're also not super short. And I would have to constantly be going out and doing math on when a production run was going to be complete. And then if somebody would go to lunch or whatever, I'd have to mentally add that on in my head. Or, if there was a problem, like that number was always changing. And I wanted to always be prepped for the next job before the current one is done. So I really needed to know when the run was going to be complete. So I needed something that was going to be able to detect like part count, part goal, and takt time, and basically do that simple math equation. Because I was spending all day, like I was out in the shop all the time, like dealing with this. So I'm like, I should be able to look at it on my computer screen. So I started looking at what machine monitoring software was out there. And it all seemed to be for like larger facilities. Like I've only got 2 machines. And like just raw like uptime metrics and stuff are not very useful to me, because I'm like, I can hear the spindle turning on like the other side of, the wall. Like I need more like analytical data and historical data, which they do, but there was nothing out there that really fit my, what I was looking for. And the cost was like, it was really expensive to get into. And it seemed really complicated. It was very intimidating. So I figured I'd just make my life even harder and build it myself. Because buying it would be too complicated. I don't know what I was thinking there. But anyway, so I built this little app on my computer that would basically tell me the part count, part goal, takt time, percent complete, and then when it was going to be, when the run was going to be done. Because I was tired of this situation where somebody would come into my office and be like, okay, Pete, like we're done. What's the next job? Where is everything? And I was just like, oh shoot, I haven't prepped it yet. I've been doing emails or something, So it's almost like a day
Right.
planning tool. So that's where it started. And then we had some more things we were trying to do with it. I hired on a part-time developer, and we were just trying to build in some more functionality to it. And we ended up figuring it would be the best idea to move it to the cloud. Just it's still only for internal use. We weren't intending on selling this, but we wanted to move it to the cloud. So we did that. And then I realized as this tool was getting better and better, I was like, man, other places could use this, and I think we'd be pretty competitive. So we need to figure out if there's a business model there, but I know we have the start of a really good product. So that was probably like 3 months in, and at that point, we went a little bit more towards like, let's figure out something that's ready for market. So we built the Haas connector because the lathe wasn't networked at the time. So we built that, got both the Fanuc machine and the Haas talking to the cloud platform, figured out how all the data standardization would work, worked on system architecture. And at that point, it just kind of started growing and growing. And I was like, yeah, I think this thing would be pretty cool. So that's sort of the story there.
Yeah, well, I remember you asking on the Discord, like, "Oh, has anybody worked with Focus?" And like back then, I had no idea that there would come to what is looking like a really cool piece of software. So
I didn't have an idea either. Like, I literally just wanted a little app on my, as this started more, like I'd look at what other people were doing in machine monitoring and be like, well, I could do that. I think I could do it even better. Also, I'm a snob about UIs. Like, I really hate bad UIs and ones that aren't customizable or anything. And I don't mean to bag on anybody, but I really liked the idea of having a piece of software where I was the one who got to call the shots on like where these buttons would be and how they would look. And it sounds stupid, but it really like makes your day better when like you're strolling through your day and you got to do something and you're like, I didn't like the behavior of that button. Like, you don't just have to live with it. Like, I'm not somebody who likes to just like live with something I don't like. I like to change it. So having access to the source code is kind of nice because I can put it on the list and change it later. So that's the dumb reason that this whole thing became a whole deal. But honestly, though, like as far as the future is looking, I'm really excited about the platform because the one thing I wanted from the start was to fix the pain point that I knew I was going to have, which was that integration was going to be really hard, right? And it was going to cost a lot of money. And as we built the platform, I realized it's not actually like, it's not impossible to make it a seamless process. It's just a lot of back end work. And I think, with the amount of, there's a lot of people in the smaller job shop, like 1 to 10 machines, that have a pretty similar like shop profile. Like from our research, there's really like 3 kind of types of shops, like as far as the way they run and the types of equipment they have. And that probably takes up 80 or 90% of the market of shops that are under 10 machines. So I figure if we could just build a product where we focus on making that integration really easy, then they're not like stuck in it. Like if they get it and they're like, yeah, this isn't that useful, they can just kind of send the piece of hardware back. So originally we were going to charge for the hardware and be like, oh yeah, 15-minute setup, you're online, you get like this kind of cloud view, and then you can pay for like more and more modules. And I was talking to somebody one day and he's like, why are you charging for the box? I was like, well, it's a piece of hardware, like it costs money. And he's like, but think about it. Like, you've built a platform where people can set it up really easily. It's very scalable. You don't have to charge for this integration because it's not that hard to do. Just don't charge for the hardware. Just focus on making sure that you can serve as many customers as possible and do it in a really good way. Because if you start charging for hardware, it's going to turn off some people. And the whole quote unquote industry 4.0 thing is pretty new to a lot of people and they're skeptical. And a large price tag up front is, it's a big ask because you still haven't proven your value. Like everybody knows that if they go out and buy a CNC machine, they can do X, Y, or Z. But it's not very well known that connecting your machine to the cloud is actually a really useful thing. Right? Like conceptually it is, but most people hear that and they like just industry 4.0 has a really bad reputation for being overcomplicated, for not being reliable, and for not being very useful. So my goal is just like, I'm not even going to charge up front because I have the responsibility to prove to the customers that this thing actually is useful, right? So I got to put my money where my mouth is. I'm sorry if that sounded too much like a sales pitch, but it's really like looking where the industry is. A lot of people are very skeptical of anything that's like cloud connected. So it's kind of on me to say like, no, look, like this is going to be a useful product, and we're going to do user interviews. We're going to talk to people. We're going to figure out how people are using it, and we're going to continue to make it better rather than focusing all our resources on like, oh, we have this factory that's got 100 machines and they want this weird feature that's only for them. Like, that market's already served. There's a million people out there who are serving that market, but there's not really many people serving like the bulk of small and mid-size job shops.
Yeah. Well, and talk a little bit about the kind of analysis you guys do on the data, because for me, in talking to you and seeing screenshots and stuff, that's really the secret sauce and what makes you guys compelling. Because like I've worked on bigger machine metrics projects, and like it's very easy to just get lost in the weeds and have like absolutely useless reports, like data that means nothing to anybody. And if you try to improve it, you're realizing you're not improving on anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's a couple levels that this works on. Originally, I was feeding raw data to myself, and I was like, this is stupid. Like, I still have to do the math, and I still got to correct this and correct that. And I was like, well, we've got computers. I'm sure we can teach them how to make sense of all this data. So we have a few vectors that it like works along. So the first vector is kind of to like promote a Kaizen mentality, because people on the shop floor aren't always aware of the bigger, type vision and, how their work factors into the bigger goal of being productive. And if you feed them the raw data, they're not going to really be able to make sense of it. So we're trying to simulate almost like what a shop owner would do. Like if I could scroll through the data, or you could scroll through the data and kind of see what was going on. And you could sort of just tell the worker, like, green means good, red means bad. Like, you could go out there and say, hey man, you got to kick it up, or hey man, you're doing a great job. But people don't like that when they're working in a shop. They don't want the boss coming out there all the time and cracking the whip and looking over their shoulder or sitting there with a stopwatch or whatever. It's not a good work environment. So that was kind of goal number one, is to create an analytics engine that would spit out some data that people on the shop floor could understand. So me as a shop owner, I could go in there and say, hey, here's the number we're trying to hit today. If that thing's green, then all good. I'll leave you alone, have a blast. And if it's red, shoot me a text, be like, hey, Pete, I don't know what's going wrong. Like, can you come out here and help me out? Or I might see it in here and I might go out there and, check up on you. So it kind of makes the employee operator or management operator relationship a little more frictionless, because everybody's still aware of what's going on, but nobody feels like, oh, I got to be on this guy all the time, or the boss is on me all the time. It's really annoying. So That's kind of what we're doing with data. As far as how we're doing it, that's kind of the really big goal, is we want to have this killer analytics engine that basically anybody in the organization, if they want to know information about the production process, they can go in and see data that's parsed in a language they'll kind of understand, like the stuff they care about. So that's the goal.
Awesome. So for those, I assume you'll have a sign up or something for the public beta. What can they expect if they join the public beta? What kind of data is currently available to, I guess, alpha clients or something like that?
Yeah, public beta right now is going to give you live machine output. It'll give you text message notifications and of like alarms or it's a little bit configurable, so you can do different things. So yeah, you've got live machine data view, you've got a messaging function, SMS, and then you will have tool life management, which is a pretty fun one. I'm pretty excited about that.
Yeah,
so
that's great.
The things we have coming down the line that aren't ready. Oh, actually, wait, no, you'll get the analytics engine too. So you can see runtime, stall time, which is like when you're not in production but should be. And then you can see setup time. We actually are able to, by looking at the machine data, we're parsing out whether the machine is like sitting there idle when it should be running, or if it's actually being set up. So you'll get that as well. And then you can kind of see a chart of your day, so you can see the part count superimposed over, if it's running, if it's being set up, if it's, red, it'll be stalled. So that's what you get on the public beta. The features that we have coming down the line, the one I'm really excited about right now is the in-process inspection. If we can nail this and have it be like very frictionless, right? Like it comes out of cam and Chatter immediately picks up on what's going on. It knows what tool is related to the probing cycle, all this stuff without you having to get in there and fuss around with it. If we can nail the in-process inspection stuff and actually hook it back up to your ERP, which again is something we're working on, but it takes a little bit of two-way communication with whatever ERPs we work with. The in-process inspection is going to be really cool because that's a whole world. I don't know what the data on this is, but I don't see most people using in-process inspection because it's sort of usually just easier to measure it or have, tell some dude to measure it than set it all up in your machine. So the CAM side, especially if you're using Fusion, has been made very user-friendly as long as your post is compatible. It's really easy to post out in-process inspection. And then, so that's kind of the into the machine part of it, which I think Autodesk has done a great job of. I'm not sure about other CAM packages. I haven't used them much, but we're trying to be on the output end of that. So like, where does the data go? Because if your machine's learning, these dimensions, you probably want to see it on a screen or something somewhere. So I'm really excited about that feature. I think it's going to be a couple months until it's like fully ready, but I'm pretty stoked about that.
Yeah, even just tracking that and being able to like output a CSV or a Excel or something would be epic, so that you have, in-process inspection documents that you can generate. That'd be really, really nice.
Yeah, I actually built, I think you might have noticed already, but I built our in-process inspection module in 2 hours one night because our mutual friend Jeff was here and we had a buyer from a big company coming by the next day. And my shop, like, we're not ISO or anything. We don't have a CMM. And I was like, we had to put on this dog and pony show. I was like, oh man, they're going to want to know what we're doing for inspection. I'm like, I should do in-process inspection. Like, Jeff's like, well, I don't want to be here till 5 a.m. I'm like, I'll get it done by 8:30. So I knocked this thing out and we had it working the next day. And she asked, like, how you logging your quality and stuff? I just pointed at the TV and we were running parts while she was there in the office. And dimensions were coming in live and saying, inspec, like with the tolerance data and everything. And she was like, oh man, like that's pretty cool.
Oh my goodness.
But, yeah.
That's epic.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, let's jump into questions. JT from DFM on the Patreon asked, will the software hardware be cost effective for 2 to 3 machines like Ampere, or will it really start at 10 plus machines like Machine Metrics?
I mean, it'll be cost effective for one machine. So we charge $50 a month per machine, hardware is included. And my thought process behind that is if you can save $50 worth of machine time by any one of the features, whether it's tool life management, like an alarm notification, if you can save whatever you bill $50 at, like in time, like then we're paying for ourselves. So yeah, you can start one machine. It's great for 3 machines. You can do 100 machines. Doesn't matter.
And then how's the pricing structure going to go moving forward? Are you going to have like extensions like Fusion where as you add more modules, you'll pay extra for that? Or have you not kind of figured that out as you're going? Or
haven't really figured that out yet. I think there are some basic modules that really should be in there because they provide a heck of a lot of value and they're not really a big load on the infrastructure. And I think most people will use them. The ones we'll probably end up charging for is the ones that do take a lot of development resources and a lot of time and testing because, obviously as a business model, you need to be able to recoup that cost, but you don't want to just raise the price on everyone. Say you have some weird esoteric like feature that like 3 people will use, but it provides a lot of value to them. And then you have, X amount of other people. Like you don't want to be billing everybody for it. So just the people who get value from it will pay for it. So I'm not sure what those modules will be. I think in-process inspection might be one. It just it's going to depend on how the reception is. But one thing we're never going to do is like take away a feature. So I'm being pretty liberal, like with the alpha and the public beta about, what modules and features you get. Like it's all kind of packaged in. And then if there's a pricing structure or if there's a pricing change down the road, I mean, we're never going to take away features from somebody. That'd be horrible. Or raise the price on like a specific like say this is now a module. Sorry, like you don't get it anymore.
Okay. And then we had a few questions, both from Tom at Inspiration Metalworks and Easton at Moria Manufacturing. Tom asked, when will I get Herco support? Easton asked, when do I get Speedio support? What do you have currently supported? What are the current ones that you're trying to develop? What's your path forward look like?
Yeah. So we've got Haas NGC. We've got Haas Cold Fire. So anything pre-NGC that's not super ancient. And then we have FANUC if you have a data server. So, or actually the data server is not necessarily required, but if you have focus on FANUC. So those are the three we support right now. I think the next up is probably going to be Speedio, just because I have friends with Speedios and they would like to have it. And I don't want to be a bad friend. No, so there's a local guy who's volunteered that I can come out there and spend a day and really knock that out. I am in the process of hiring somebody to kind of take over the day-to-day operations of my shop and like sort of on a more management and programming level. So once that happens, which I think will be the end of the year, then I can kind of start taking chunks where like I spend a day or two building the Speedio connector. I got to find somebody with a Herco because you sort of have to be on site to get it working. But I'd say we'll definitely have Speedio by the end of the year. Herco is TBD, but I think it's the next one down on the list. So.
And then Obsidian Tools asked, what do you think about general communication protocols like Umadi, which I'd never heard of, to connect machines and get data? Will there be a universal solution or many small software solutions?
This is a huge topic and a really good question. I think those universal protocols are very good for the industry as a whole, and they're completely necessary. When it comes to what machine shops need today, they're not really the solution because they're one part of a greater ecosystem. So the big one right now, I'm not quite familiar with the one you mentioned, but I know there's MT Connect, which is a standard for data communication of industrial devices. But with MT Connect, and they're doing a lot of great work and really spearheading the idea of trying to get machine tool builders and device manufacturers and everything all together to like focus on one thing, because no one company is going to kind of build the future of that industry 4.0 deal. It's going to be a team effort. So the guys at AMT who are doing MT Connect are doing the Lord's work in just, interfacing with basically everybody in the industry and trying to get them on the same platform. So I think it's great. There's still a place for those edge devices and then the cloud platforms. I mean, my goal with Chatter, again, one of the reasons we don't charge for the boxes, I don't see any reason those boxes should exist in the first place. Like if you think about it.
Right.
Like the machine's got an Ethernet port on it. Shouldn't it be able to communicate via some standard protocol? And, you just set the API endpoint and your API key, and, now you got the Chatter API and it's sending data in the correct format up to it. Like those devices shouldn't exist. And I would hope that we know how this industry is, but I would hope that in 20 years, these devices wouldn't exist. They definitely still will. But the goal is to get away from that. And the only way to do that is by, open standard protocols.
Okay. So I guess what would you say is the biggest thing holding back Industry 4.0? Because like I've heard of MT Connect. I've never seen an implementation of it, but I've heard of it for 6 years now or something?
Yeah. Well, you probably have seen an implementation of it. The thing is that it's not a piece of like software itself. So a lot of software uses MT Connect and a lot of machines use MT Connect. As far as the thing that's holding back Industry 4.0 is probably the focus on very large installations, right? You have these, and this is where I'm going to get a little controversial. So I'm sorry, I don't mean to offend anybody. You have these incumbents in the industry who have always been along this model of we can make a ton of money by charging this one customer an insane amount. We're going to build all these custom features and we're going to fly people out there and we're going to get in the back of their machines with a voltmeter and we're going to figure out these connectors and we're going to build this thing, and their factory's going to be down for 3 months while our staff's out there, and then we're going to have on-site support, and it's just like this big thing, right? In reality, these devices are already computerized, right? They have, whether it's just a PLC or a full, Linux on there, They already have all that data. They just need a protocol to communicate by. And once they have that, then you can see more things like the chatter boxes come online where it's just like plug it in, it'll start working, right? But right now you have all these incumbents who know they can make a lot of money by making their integration very complicated. So they just do that, right? And then there's all these bespoke solutions out there. And the biggest issue with that too is not only the upfront cost, but the maintenance, right? Like in perpetuity, we'll be maintaining chatter. And if one person's site is being maintained, everybody else's site is being maintained. If you're doing all these custom installations with custom connectors, all of those need to be maintained, especially for security reasons, right? Like say you find a hole and you did an on-site installation where that box is like literally physically installed somewhere, you got to fly somebody out, to make sure it's secure or whatever the problem might be or whatever the update might be. So I think the biggest thing, holding Industry 4.0 back right now is just how complicated it is. It's not accessible, and it also has a very bad reputation, and rightfully so.
Right. Yeah. I mean, when you promise the world and give almost nothing to small shop users, what's the point is I think what a lot of people think when they hear Industry 4.0.
Exactly. So I try to stay away from that term, to be honest. Like, I don't know what a better term would be, but it's just like, it has such a just nasty connotation right now because everybody's kind of had a run-in with Industry 4.0 and most people walk away going, oh, this is just horrible.
Yeah. Well, it feels like the undercar spray installed at the dealership. You're like, I don't need this. I don't want this. Yeah. What's it doing for me?
And there's a lot of like gurus in that space too, like consultants and stuff. And nobody wants a consultant. They want a good product. Like a good product shouldn't need a consultant. You should ship it to the customer. The thing plugs in, it freaking works. It does what they want. Like you shouldn't need to like price gouge some person just because they want to connect this machine to the internet. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's fairly rampant in the industry too. Like I have in the past looked at auto coolant refill systems, like a little more intelligent than just the Haas one that, sees a low tank and dumps in whatever it's already mixed. And like the one I looked at was, I think Will Fill was the brand, and they're like out of somewhere in Europe, but they wanted like $16,000 or $20,000 a machine. Oh. I was like, yeah, no, we can't do that. Like, what are you talking about? And like, it was cool. It measures coolant concentration and has an active refractometer and will monitor and variable all that. But like, it's still not $20,000 worth of stuff.
Yeah. The thing is, to somebody, it's worth $20,000.
But it's those big incumbents.
Yeah, but with them, it's a physical product they're selling. So scalability, as you and I both know, in physical product is a lot harder. So sometimes it's better to just like sell this piece of hardware for a large amount of money and sell it to less people, right? Because you could charge a fifth and sell 5 times as more. Your life would be way worse, right? You make the same amount of money. Right. With software, it's different, because we just like, it doesn't matter to me. Like I guess there's more servers to load and more customer support. But at the end of the day, like software is very scalable. So that's why you see companies like, Netflix and Google and stuff, they scale like crazy, and they hardly need to charge their customers because it doesn't really matter to them. Like each incremental unit doesn't cost them more money. So they're just like, let's just create insane value and let the customers run with it.
Right. So I guess speaking of software, you are a big security nut. What kind of security? Because I know that's probably going to be a big question from people wanting to jump on Chatter.
Yeah. What kind of security does Chatter have?
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, Chatter, how do we explain this? Give me a moment. The Chatter boxes communicate through our API. So it's just over the open internet, and all your packets are encrypted and signed and kind of all that standard stuff you'd expect. So there's no way somebody can intercept, those packets once they're between the Chatter box and our servers. The big problem is on your local network. So let's use the FANUC protocol Focus, for example. That protocol doesn't have any authentication or encryption. So those packets can just be intercepted by anybody that's on your network, which is sort of a problem, right? Because Focus, we run it in a one-way protocol, so we're currently only collecting data, but you can actually make the machines do things via that protocol. You could turn a program, you could send a program, you could run the program, you could just wipe somebody's tool offsets, you could do all sorts of things. So the big concern is the security on your local network. So the way I recommend to do it, which is how I have my shop set up, is there is a dedicated network that just has my Fanuc machine, my Chatterbox, and my personal or my CAD machine on it, because the CAD machine has to be able to send FTP. So this is on just a little 3-person network, and it's very tightly controlled. There's no IoT devices. There's no other computers that might have something malicious on them. You just want to lock it down because you want to make sure that the pathway between, whenever something is not encrypted and whenever it doesn't use authentication, you want to make sure that you know for a fact that nobody else is on that network. So even if you're just like your situation, like you're using FTP to send programs, right? You want to make sure that nothing else on that network should be able to talk to your brother Speedio. Because if you get something malicious, then you have a really big problem, right?
Right. Yeah, actually, after we talked, a couple months ago, I created another network and put all my IoT devices on it and pulled them off my network because I was like, that's probably a good idea. Pete's onto something there.
Yeah, that's kind of the standard easy way. You can go really crazy with it, but as far as what will, be most effective for the least amount of effort, I really recommend, if you're kind of getting into networking your machines and have a bunch of different devices, get this thing called a Ubiquiti UDM Pro. And it's like a fancy router. It's a little pricey, but it's really worth it. Because, if we want to go into like the real consequences of this stuff, cyber warfare is huge right now. And imagine we get into an armed conflict with some country. We're going to need to ramp up manufacturing. It wouldn't be that hard for one of these countries. Hopefully they're not listening right now and get this idea from me. It wouldn't be that hard for them to have a 0-day exploit waiting where they're just like, boop, every single network connected Fanuc and Haas machine in the country is now offline. Sorry. We just wiped all your parameters.
Like, you heard it here first. It's all Pete's fault if this happens.
No, it's not. It's not. But I'm just saying, like we should be diligent about making sure we don't have malicious things on our networks, because these machines don't really have any security on their own. Like your laptop has security, your PC has security. These machines hand off all the security to you. It's completely your responsibility. And if you just plug a network cable in for, oh, cool, I got FTP now. It's like, yeah, you just also potentially exposed your machine to something malicious, like talking to it. So that's kind of my security summary.
Okay. Well, that kind of wraps up questions and brings us into shop news and new things. You kind of went into it. So you're looking to hand off the FTR side of it and focus more on chatter. Anything else going big in your world?
Yeah, we're exactly like you said. So I have a great guy who's a mutual friend of ours who we're hopefully going to be, moving out here, and he's going to kind of take over day to day. And then, that'll be really nice because he's excellent at what he does. Really smart, fun guy. But we're going to do that. And then I'm going to be moving more to focusing on the business end of the CNC business, kind of more customer facing, as well as, mainly full-time on chatter. So I'm getting married at the end of this month, October. Then I'm going to come back.
Congrats.
Thank you. I'm going to come back and knock out just kind of the things that need to be done for the public beta. We're going to launch that in November. And then hopefully around then we'll have this new guy coming on to kind of take over the day-to-day of the shop. Other things going on in the shop, I am working on some QMS type stuff, and hopefully going to be really upping our game on that side because we need it. So that comes down to kind of just like there's developing the processes for all that. But then on the flip side, or not the flip side, before that, you need to, if you want to do this without causing yourself a bunch of work, you have to develop the process to develop the process, right? So you know how I am, I'll build a software tool to do anything, right? So we're kind of working on this little, I say it's an internal tool, right? It's an internal tool that will help with developing those quality procedures very easily and kind of integrate with the other stuff we're using for ERP and for CAM and whatnot. So that's pretty much shop news overall. We just took over this new suite that we're in here. So I'm actually next door of where my machines are now. So it's nice and quiet.
Oh, nice. Congrats. And it sounds like I'll be on the lookout for chatter.qms in the near future.
No comment. No comment.
Well, that brings me to the last question I ask every guest, which is, what did you research this week? And it can be everything and anything under the sun, just what's been popping up in your search browser.
I got addicted to this one guy's YouTube channel where he does these just things that are really interesting, but nobody needs to do with electronics. So he built a video card himself, a really horrible video card. Like I think it was 200 pixel by 75 pixels. And he built it all just out of like circuitry. So, he had a clock on there and a little, a few different boards, and he explained how to do the entire like wiring hookup and everything. So I went down the rabbit hole and I've been learning about just the different protocol, like network protocols, USB, stuff like that, and how they actually function just on like a binary level. Like, if you hook up a oscilloscope and look at the signal and kind of trace it back to try to figure out, reverse engineer those packets and stuff. So that's what I've been researching this week for no real reason. I just I feel like it's something I should know, because it's easy to get caught up in a world of like where everything just works. And even if you're making software, everything just kind of works for you. And you kind of forget the basics of like, no, everything's actually in binary. And you should probably not take this USB keyboard for granted, because it's probably doing some really cool things. So that's what I've been researching.
So actually, before we wrap up, you never really talked about how you got into programming. Where did that come from? Because you were making parts and running CNCs and all of a sudden had a software business.
Yeah, I actually in 6th grade, in 7th grade, I had a server in my room, which is actually the same PC case that I use for my CAD machine today. I had a server. I begged my dad. I said, Dad, we need a static IP because I got this Ubuntu server and I want to do I want to build a website. So he said, okay, we got a static IP. Really what I used it for is I built I forget what they don't really use it these days, but it's sort of like a VPN. It's a web page where you go to your server and then you can basically bypass a website blocker, because I want to play games at school. Well, actually, it wasn't even that I want to play games. I was never into video games. I just didn't like that they could see my web traffic and that they were allowed to tell me what I could and couldn't go to. So that got me into like Ubuntu, and I had like a lamp stack there and was doing all that. And then I was kind of designing websites for just like, I don't know, if my mom's friend had a little business or I don't know, nails or something, I would make websites. So that was kind of my background in networking and programming and computers. So that was what I was doing up until I kind of got the mechanical thing. And then I just basically dropped all that for a long while. And then when I started building what became Chatter, kind of got back into it. My feet were a little shaky, off the start because I hadn't done it in so long, but kind of all came back to me pretty quick. And there's a lot of new technology that comes along like in that like period of time. It's pretty crazy, but yeah, that's my programming background.
Okay, that makes more sense. I was like, man, where did you find all the time with,
Yeah, and the other thing I should mention too is I have some really great people who have been helping me out, like old friends, like from junior high and high school, who are now like senior software engineers at Netflix. And like one was a software engineer at Stripe. So he's like very good with security. So I've been throughout the process of building Chatter. Oh, and then another one is this big shot UI UX designer now. So throughout building Chatter, I've been begging these guys to do just 30-minute or 1 hour little Zoom meetings with me. And a couple of them have done it. The other ones are just kind of like, if I'm in a bind, I'll just Facebook message, hey, I really need help. Here, like, what do you think of the architecture for this part of the software? So, I mean, I could not be more thankful to those guys, because I'm sure I really annoy them with my questions, but you really need somebody to bounce something off of who has a lot of high level experience in the space. So like, I'm not going to make them do the grunt work for free, but they're totally willing for me to like, hey, this is what I'm thinking for architecture. They say, yeah, that looks good, or change this. then I'll go off and build it, and I'll come back and be like, hey, this is secure, right? Like, this is good. I did this the right way. And, people have helped me out with security auditing and stuff. So I'm not like the most experienced programmer in the world, but I've been doing it at least 8 hours a day for 7 months straight now. And then I just have people review my work to make sure it's, it's legit, it's secure, it's fast, all that type of stuff. Cause that's really important when you're putting hardware on people's machines and handling people's data. That's got to be kind of priority number one is that it's not getting lost and nobody else can get to it.
Definitely. Yeah. Well, if people want to find Chatter, where can they find it on the web? And where can they go sign up for the beta when it pops, or where will it be?
So you can go to on Instagram, chatter.dev, .dev, and then on the web, also chatter.dev, and we have a site there where you can go. Actually, you can even do this now. You can kind of put in like a pre-order, so it doesn't charge you or anything, but it's sort of just like, off the line when we launch the public beta, there's going to be like only a certain amount of people that we can bring on per week, just because of the time it takes to provision the nodes and test them and everything and ship them. But there's a place you can go in and put out the number of machines you have and what you want your billing to look like, just like billing cycle wise, and then we'll get you in line. And then we have a new thing coming out that we're beta testing right now, which is like an onboarding portal. So what would happen is when it comes time to bring you on, we'll send you a link. You go through and you can kind of pre-configure your machines, like what machines you have. And then what it does is it sort of puts together a corresponding order. So like, say you have like 6 Haas NGC machines, you only need one actual box to connect to all those, assuming they're networked, right? So we'll put together a summary of what hardware you want, and then you kind of see what you're getting. And then, at that time you hit go, and then, within, the process really, like, we'll get it shipped out in a day or two. And then our average setup time, I said 15 minutes or less, but our average setup time has been like about 5 minutes to get, like, just from opening the box to like getting the machine seeing, and sending basic data to the cloud. You can do configuration like custom macros and stuff, but as far as the basic setup, like, hey, I want to just see this machine, what it's doing online, it usually only takes like 5 minutes. So that's basically the product.
That's pretty epic.
Yeah.
Well, Pete, I really appreciate you coming on. Patreon thank yous. Thank you, Curtis, for joining the Patreon this week. And thanks to everyone else for backing the Patreon. Helps me produce episodes like this and get people like Pete on. And thanks for taking the time, Pete. It was great to get to talk to you finally and hear the whole backstory. I had no idea half this stuff. We talk fairly often on Discord, and I just had kind of assumed some of the backstory, but it's cool to get to talk to you in depth.
Absolutely, man. It's been a blast. Thanks for having me on.
And thanks everyone for listening. We'll be back next week.